The dust-stained stagecoach rolled to a stop outside Willow Creek, Arizona Territory, 1876, bringing with it a woman whose secrets were as heavy as the trunk she carried. Fiona Matthews clutched her worn leather glove to her chest, heart hammering against her ribs as the small frontier town materialized before her. It wasn't much a main street lined with weathered buildings, a saloon with peeling paint, a general store, and a handful of houses scattered like playing cards across the dusty landscape. But it was far from St. Louis, and that was all that mattered. "End of the line, madam," the driver called, jumping down to help her with her belongings. Fiona descended from the coach, her burgundy traveling dress immediately collecting the fine dust that seemed to coat everything in this part of the country. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight, so different from the life she'd left behind. "Is there a boarding house in town?" she asked, shielding her eyes from the relentless sun. "Mrs. Holloway's place, just down the street there." The driver pointed to a two-story building with white lace curtains. Decent enough accommodations for a lady. Fiona nodded her thanks, paid the man, and gathered her belongings. She had just enough money to last a month, maybe 2 if she was careful. By then, she would need to find employment, though what skills a disgraced schoolteacher might offer in this dusty corner of nowhere remained to be seen. Mrs. Holloway proved to be a plump, pleasant widow who asked few questions, a blessing Fiona hadn't dared hope for. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a view of the distant mountains. When Fiona closed the door behind her, she finally allowed herself a moment of weakness, sinking onto the bed as tears streamed down her face. She had escaped, but the shame had followed her like a shadow. 3 days later, Fiona stood outside the town's only school, a one-room building with a bell tower that had seen better days. She straightened her spine, adjusted her collar, and stepped inside to inquire about the position advertised in the general store's window. The town council was desperate enough for a teacher that they hired her with minimal questions. Fiona provided references she knew would never be contacted, given the distance to St. Louis, and claimed her previous position had ended when the school closed due to lack of funds. It wasn't entirely a lie. The school was indeed closed now, though not for the reasons she implied. Life settled into a rhythm. Fiona taught the children of Willow Creek with a passion that surprised even herself. Perhaps it was atonement, this dedication to her students. Or perhaps it was simply that here in this dusty town at the edge of civilization, she was allowed to be someone new. It was on a Friday afternoon, nearly a month after her arrival, when Fiona first saw him. She was walking back from the school, arms laden with papers to grade, when a commotion from the far end of the street caught her attention. A group of riders was approaching, trail-worn and dusty, headed for the livery stable. At their lead was a man with shoulders as broad as the horizon, sitting tall in the saddle of a magnificent buckskin horse. Something in his bearing made her pause, a quiet authority, a stillness that seemed at odds with the wildness around him. His face was shadowed by his hat, but as he passed, he tipped the brim in her direction, and Fiona caught a glimpse of eyes the color of a summer storm. "Miss Matthews," Mrs. Holloway greeted her that evening at supper. "I see you've noticed our visitors, cattle drive coming through. They'll be here a few days, resting up before the final push to Prescott." "I see," Fiona replied, trying to sound disinterested. "I suppose the saloon will be busy tonight." Mrs. Holloway chuckled. "Indeed it will, though I wouldn't worry about this bunch. Elijah Mercer runs a tight outfit. No troublemakers allowed." Mercer? The name felt strange on her tongue. That'd be the tall one on the buckskin. Good man. Brings his herd through twice a year, always pays his debts and keeps his men in line. Mrs. Holloway passed the potatoes. His ranch is about 40 miles north of here. The Diamond M built it from nothing, they say. Fiona nodded, filing away the information while telling herself it didn't matter. Men like Elijah Mercer had no place in her carefully constructed new life. Men with honest eyes and straightforward dealings weren't for women carrying secrets like hers. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Fiona dressed in her best, a navy blue dress with modest lace at the collar, and headed to the small church at the edge of town. She had made it a point to attend services regularly, understanding that in a town this size, absence would be noted and questioned. She was early, as was her habit, settling into a pew near the back where she could observe without being observed. The church filled gradually, familiar faces nodding in her direction. Mrs. Holloway joined her, fanning herself against the growing heat. Moments before the service began, a hush fell over the congregation as several cowboys filed in. At their lead was Elijah Mercer, hat in hand, hair still damp from what must have been a recent washing. He'd exchanged trail clothes for a clean shirt and dark vest. His men followed his example, subdued and respectful. As the only available space was the pew across from Fiona, she found herself face to face with the rancher when he looked up after a brief prayer. His eyes widened slightly in recognition he'd noticed her on the street, and he offered a small nod that she returned reflexively. Throughout the service, Fiona was painfully aware of his presence. Not once did she catch him looking in her direction, yet she felt observed all the same. When the final hymn concluded and the congregation began to disperse, she made her escape quickly, hoping to avoid any interaction. But fate had other plans. As she rounded the corner of the church, intending to take the back path to Mrs. Holloway's, she collided with a solid form. "Pardon me, madam." Strong hands steadied her, then immediately released her once she'd found her balance. Fiona looked up into the face of Elijah Mercer, close enough now to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the lines at their corners suggesting he smiled often. "No harm done, Mr. Mercer." The words escaped before she could consider how they revealed she knew his name. A slight quirk of his brow was the only indication of his surprise. "You have me at a disadvantage, miss." "Matthews, Fiona Matthews, I'm the schoolteacher." "Ah," he nodded, as if that explained everything. "New to town, I take it. Don't recall seeing you during the spring drive." "Yes." "I arrived about a month ago." He studied her for a moment longer than was comfortable, as if trying to place something about her. "Well, Miss Matthews, welcome to Willow Creek. It's a good town, full of good people." The unspoken question lingered between them. Was she one of those good people? "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. If you'll excuse me, I have lessons to prepare." She stepped around him, feeling his gaze follow her retreat. "Miss Matthews," he called after her, and she paused, looking back. "We're having a small celebration tonight at the saloon." Nothing rowdy, just a meal to thank the town for their hospitality. The schoolmarm would be welcome. Fiona's instinct was to refuse immediately. Saloons were no place for a respectable teacher. But something in his expression, a genuine warmth without expectation, made her hesitate. "That's very kind, but I don't think the whole town will be there," he interrupted gently. "Including Mrs. Holloway and Pastor Davies. Might be a good way to get to know your neighbors better." Put that way, refusal seemed almost rude. "Perhaps I'll stop by briefly," she conceded. His smile transformed his face, erasing the weathered lines and revealing a glimpse of a younger man beneath the trail-hardened exterior. "Looking forward to it, Miss Matthews." As Fiona continued on her way, she couldn't help but feel she'd just stepped onto a dangerous path. Elijah Mercer seemed like a good man, the worst kind for someone with secrets to keep. The saloon that evening was transformed. The usual card tables had been pushed aside to make room for long trestle tables laden with food. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the scene, and someone had taken the trouble to clean the windows, allowing the last light of day to filter through. Fiona entered tentatively, Mrs. Holloway at her side providing social cover. True to Mercer's word, it seemed half the town was their families with children, the storekeepers, even Pastor Davies and his wife. "Miss Matthews." A booming voice cut through the chatter, and Fiona turned to see Elijah Mercer approaching, a genuine smile lighting his features. He dressed for the occasion in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and what appeared to be new denim trousers. His hair, the color of sun-bleached wheat, was combed neatly back from his forehead. "Mr. Mercer," she acknowledged, aware of Mrs. Holloway's curious glance between them. "Glad you could make it," he said, then turned to include her companion. "Mrs. Holloway, you're looking lovely as ever." The widow actually blushed. "You're a silver-tongued devil as always, Elijah Mercer. I'd have thought all those years under the sun would have baked some sense into you by now." He laughed, a rich sound that drew smiles from those nearby. "Now where would be the fun in that? Come, ladies, let me get you something to drink. We've got lemonade, coffee, and for those so inclined, a fine whiskey I brought back from my last trip to Denver." "Lemonade would be lovely," Fiona said quickly. The evening progressed pleasantly. Fiona found herself introduced to dozens of townsfolk she hadn't yet met, her status as the new schoolteacher opening doors to conversations she might otherwise have avoided. Throughout it all, she was aware of Elijah moving through the crowd, a natural host ensuring everyone's comfort. It was later, after the families with young children had departed and the gathering had grown quieter, that he appeared at her side again, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering one to her. "You've been surrounded by well-meaning folks all evening." Fiona accepted the cup gratefully. "Thank you, it's been nice, actually. Everyone's been very welcoming. Willow Creek is good at that." He gestured to a quiet corner where 2 chairs stood unoccupied. "Mind if we sit for a spell? My men have things well in hand." She hesitated but could find no polite reason to refuse. They settled into the chairs, a respectable distance between them. "So, Miss Matthews," he began, "what brings a clearly educated woman to a dusty little town like this one?" The question she'd been dreading. Fiona took a sip of coffee to buy time. "A teaching position opened up. I was looking for a change, quite a change from." He left the sentence hanging. "St. Louis," she supplied, sticking to her prepared story. "I taught at a girls' school there." Elijah nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "Long way from home." "Sometimes home is where you make it, Mr. Mercer." That earned her a genuine smile. "On that we agree completely." "I came west with nothing but the clothes on my back and a dream of open spaces. Took me 10 years of cowboying for others before I could stake my own claim. And now you have the Diamond M." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You've heard of it." Mrs. Holloway mentioned it, Fiona admitted. "She speaks highly of you. Edith Holloway is good people, lost her husband in '65, Gettysburg." He looked into his coffee cup. "My brother, too." The personal revelation surprised her. "I'm sorry," Elijah shrugged. "Long time ago now, war took a lot of good men. Guess that's why I feel obliged to make something of the life I still have." He glanced up, catching her gaze. "What about you? Family back east?" "No," Fiona said, the word coming out sharper than intended. She softened her tone. "No family to speak of. My parents passed when I was young. An aunt raised me." It wasn't entirely false. Her parents had indeed died young, her father of consumption, her mother of a broken heart 6 months later. The aunt was real too, though she'd been dead for 3 years now. Elijah seemed to sense her discomfort and changed the subject. "I hear you've made quite an impression at the school. Tommy Miller's mother says he's actually reading now, which she credits entirely to your patience." Relief flooded Fiona's chest. "Tommy's a bright boy. He just needed someone to believe in him. Sometimes that's all any of us need." Elijah's gaze was warm, and for a moment, Fiona allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to have someone believe in her that way, someone who knew all her flaws and loved her anyway. The thought was quickly banished. Such things weren't for her, not anymore. "It's getting late," she said, rising from her chair. "Thank you for the coffee and for hosting this lovely evening." Elijah stood immediately. "Let me walk you back to Mrs. Holloway's." "That's not necessary. My mother raised me better than to let a lady walk alone after dark," he interrupted gently. "Besides, I'd like the company if you don't mind providing it. Put that way, how could she refuse?" Fiona nodded her agreement, and after Elijah spoke briefly with his foreman, they stepped out into the cool night air. The walk wasn't long, but the streets of Willow Creek were dark save for the occasional spill of lamplight from a window. They moved in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds their footsteps and the distant piano from the saloon. "Will you be staying in Willow Creek long?" Fiona asked eventually. "Just until Tuesday. Need to get the herd to Prescott by the end of the month." He glanced at her. "I'll be back through in the fall, though. Always stop here on the way back to the ranch for winter." "I see." Fiona wasn't sure why the information caused a flutter in her chest. "And you, planning to put down roots here?" The question caught her off guard. I haven't thought that far ahead." "The school term runs through December." Elijah nodded, seeming to understand what she wasn't saying. "Sometimes it's best to take life one day at a time." They reached Mrs. Holloway's boarding house all too soon. Fiona paused at the bottom of the steps, turning to face her escort. "Thank you for walking me home, Mr. Mercer." "Elijah," he corrected with a small smile. "After sharing coffee and conversation, I think we can dispense with formalities, don't you?" Fiona hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, Elijah." "My pleasure, Fiona." The way he said her name with a kind of gentle reverence made her breath catch. "I hope I'll see you again before we leave town." "Perhaps," she said noncommittally. "Good night." He tipped his hat. "Sweet dreams." As Fiona climbed the stairs to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that Elijah Mercer was going to complicate her carefully constructed new life. And complications were the last thing she needed. The next day passed in a blur of lessons and children's voices. Fiona threw herself into her teaching with even more fervor than usual, as if the work could distract her from thoughts of a certain rancher with kind eyes. It nearly worked, until a knock at the schoolhouse door after the children had departed interrupted her grading. She looked up to find Elijah standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "Hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, remaining on the threshold until invited in. Fiona set down her pencil. "Not at all, just finishing up some work." She gestured to the empty classroom. "What brings you by, Mr. Elijah?" He stepped inside, glancing around the simple schoolroom with its rows of desks and chalkboard. "Nice place you've got here. Reminds me of the school I attended, though that one had a leaky roof and twice as many students." "Where was that?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Pennsylvania. Little town outside of Pittsburgh." He moved closer, setting a small package wrapped in brown paper on her desk. "Brought you something." Fiona stared at the package as if it might bite. "You shouldn't have." "Probably not," he agreed with a grin, "but I did anyway. Go on, open it." With hesitant fingers, she unwrapped the parcel to find a book, a beautiful edition of Thoreau's Walden, bound in green leather. "I noticed you didn't have much with you," he explained, suddenly seeming a bit uncertain. "Thought you might enjoy some reading material." Trail boss before me used to say Thoreau understood solitude better than most. Fiona ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched beyond words. It was the first gift she'd received since arriving in Willow Creek, and possibly the most thoughtful one in years. "It's wonderful," she said softly. "Thank you." Relief crossed his features. "You're welcome. I've got a copy back at the ranch. Read it so many times the binding's falling apart." The mention of his ranch reminded Fiona of the reality of their situation he was passing through, a man with roots elsewhere while she was hiding in plain sight. "We're moving out tomorrow," he continued, as if reading her thoughts. "Wanted to say a proper goodbye. I appreciate that." Fiona stood, putting the desk between them as a physical barrier. "I wish you safe travels." Elijah studied her face for a moment. "Would it be too forward to ask if I might write to you? Nothing improper, just friendly correspondence." The request took her by surprise. Letters meant connection, and connection meant risk. Yet the thought of never hearing from him again created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. "I suppose that would be all right," she found herself saying. His smile was worth the moment of weakness. "Good. I'm not much of a writer, but I'll do my best not to bore you." "I'm sure you won't," Fiona replied, surprised by her own sincerity. He reached for his hat, which he'd set on one of the student desks. "Well, I should let you get back to your work." "Thank you for making a stranger feel welcome, Fiona. "You're hardly a stranger now," she said without thinking. His eyes warmed at that. "No, I suppose I'm not." He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "Take care of yourself, schoolmarm. I'll be thinking of you under those stars on the trail." Before she could formulate a response, he was gone, leaving behind only the scent of leather and pine and a book that would keep her company through the lonely nights ahead. The first letter arrived 3 weeks later, the envelope dusty from travel, but the handwriting surprisingly neat for a man who worked with his hands. Fiona waited until she was alone in her room that evening to open it, savoring the moment like a rare treat. Elijah wrote as he spoke directly, with flashes of quiet humor and unexpected poetry. He described the cattle drive, the challenges of crossing swollen rivers and navigating rocky passes. He mentioned the men who rode with him, little anecdotes that painted them as individuals rather than faceless cowboys. And he asked about her, how the school was faring, whether she'd had time to read Walden, if Willow Creek was beginning to feel like home. Fiona read the letter twice before setting it aside to compose her reply. She was careful in what she shared, stories of her students, descriptions of the changing landscape as summer began to give way to fall, her thoughts on Thoreau's philosophy of simplicity. Nothing personal, nothing that might reveal the secrets she carried. Yet even with these boundaries, the correspondence felt intimate, a connection to the outside world she hadn't allowed herself since arriving in Willow Creek. Summer faded into autumn. The letters continued, arriving every few weeks, becoming a bright spot in Fiona's increasingly settled life. She found herself looking forward to mail day with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. In his 5th letter, Elijah mentioned he'd be bringing a herd through Willow Creek again in late October, on his way back to the Diamond M for the winter. The news should have alarmed her, the prospect of facing him again, of maintaining her carefully constructed facade, but instead, Fiona felt a flutter of something dangerously close to happiness. October arrived with a burst of color in the cottonwoods along the creek and a crispness in the morning air. Fiona had settled into a comfortable routine, teaching during the day, taking supper with Mrs. Holloway and the other boarders, then retiring to her room to read or write letters by lamplight. She'd made cautious friendships with several townswomen and earned the respect of even the most skeptical parents with her dedication to their children's education. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe she might have found a place where her past couldn't reach her. Then, on a bright Tuesday morning, a rider tore into town, horse lathered and heaving, bringing news that shattered her fragile peace. The stage coach from Phoenix had been attacked by bandits. Several passengers were wounded, including a man identified as Elijah Mercer. The injured had been taken to a way station 15 miles south. The town doctor immediately prepared to ride out, and without conscious thought, Fiona volunteered to accompany him. "I have nursing experience," she explained to the surprised physician, "and the schoolhouse can spare me for a day." Dr. Jensen, a pragmatic man in his 60s, merely nodded. "Be ready in 30 minutes. Bring bandages if you have them." The ride to the way station was tense and silent. Fiona's mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. By the time they arrived, her hands were trembling, though she hid it well beneath her practical exterior. The way station was little more than a sturdy cabin with a few outbuildings, designed as a rest stop for stage coaches making the long journey between towns. Today it had been transformed into a makeshift hospital, with the wounded laid out on bedrolls in the main room. Fiona's eyes scanned the injured, heart in her throat, until she spotted him, Elijah, pale but conscious, a blood-soaked bandage around his upper arm. His eyes widened when he saw her, a mix of surprise and something deeper crossing his features. "Fiona." His voice was hoarse but strong. She moved to his side, professional mask firmly in place. "Mr. Mercer. I came with Dr. Jensen to assist." His lips quirked in a weak smile. "Back to formalities, I see." "How badly are you hurt?" she asked, ignoring the comment as she knelt beside him. "Bullet went clean through the arm, hurts like the devil, but I'll live." His eyes never left her face. "You didn't have to come." "I'm here to help the doctor," she replied, though they both knew it wasn't the whole truth. Dr. Jensen approached then, kneeling to examine Elijah's wound. "Let's have a look, Mr. Mercer. Miss Matthews, if you could prepare fresh bandages." For the next several hours, Fiona worked alongside the doctor, cleaning wounds, preparing poultices, and offering comfort to the injured. 2 passengers had died in the initial attack, but the rest would recover, given time and care. Elijah watched her throughout, his gaze following her movements across the room. When she finally returned to check his bandages, the other patients were either sleeping or being tended by the way station manager's wife. "You're good at this," he observed quietly as she unwrapped the stained cloth from his arm. "I told you I had nursing experience." She kept her eyes on her work, afraid of what he might see in them. "From the war." Fiona's hands stilled momentarily. "Yes," she admitted. "I volunteered at a hospital in St. Louis. I was young, but they needed all the help they could get." "Brave thing to do," she shook her head. "Not really. I stayed safely behind the lines while men like your brother died on distant fields. Courage comes in many forms, Fiona." His uninjured hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his bandaged arm, including riding 15 miles to help strangers. "You're not a stranger," she said softly, echoing her words from months before. His eyes darkened. "No, I'm not, though I sometimes wonder if I know you at all." The comment hit too close to her fears. Fiona withdrew her hand, resuming her task with renewed focus. "You should rest. The doctor says you can be moved to town tomorrow if you're stable." "Fiona," the way he said her name made her pause. "Thank you for coming." She allowed herself to meet his gaze briefly. "You're welcome, Elijah." The following day, those well enough to travel were loaded into wagons for the journey to Willow Creek. Elijah insisted he could ride, but Dr. Jensen overruled him, pointing out that blood loss and a night spent on a hard floor had left him weaker than he cared to admit. Fiona rode in the lead wagon with the doctor, and 2 of the more seriously wounded. Elijah was placed in the second wagon, much to his visible frustration. By the time they reached town, word of their approach had spread, and a crowd had gathered in front of the doctor's house. Willing hands helped unload the injured, with the most serious cases settled in the physician's spare rooms and the others distributed to the hotel and boarding houses. Mrs. Holloway immediately offered a ground floor room for Elijah, citing her experience as a nurse during the war as qualification to tend him. Fiona felt an irrational stab of jealousy at the arrangement, quickly suppressed. "You've done more than enough, Miss Matthews," Dr. Jensen told her kindly. "Go home and rest. The school children will need you tomorrow." She nodded, suddenly exhausted now that the crisis had passed. As she turned to leave, she caught sight of Elijah being helped into Mrs. Holloway's parlor, his face drawn with pain despite his attempts to mask it. For a moment, their eyes met across the street, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of the tenuous connection that had formed in the months since their first meeting. Then he was gone, disappearing into the boarding house, and Fiona was left with the unsettling realization that Elijah Mercer had somehow become important to her. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. Fiona taught her classes, prepared lessons, and steadfastly avoided thinking about the wounded man recovering just down the street. Each evening, Mrs. Holloway provided updates over supper. Elijah was running a slight fever. Elijah was finally eating properly. Elijah had managed to sit up for an hour today. "He's been asking about you," the widow mentioned casually on the 4th night. "Wondering why you haven't visited." Fiona concentrated on cutting her meat into precise pieces. "I've been busy with school. The children have their harvest pageant next week." Mrs. Holloway's expression was knowing. "I'm sure you could spare 10 minutes. The man saved 3 women from those bandits, took a bullet for his trouble." Guilt twisted in Fiona's stomach. She hadn't known that detail. Perhaps tomorrow after school, she conceded. Good. Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. The poor man is going stir-crazy. Some fresh company would do him good. The following afternoon, Fiona found herself standing outside the door to Elijah's temporary room, a book in hand and uncertainty in her heart. She knocked softly. "Come in," his deep voice called. She entered to find him propped up against pillows, a quilt spread across his lap despite the room's warmth. His face was paler than she remembered, with several days' growth of beard shadowing his jaw, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "Fiona," he said, straightening. "This is a pleasant surprise. I brought you something to read," she explained, holding up the book, her own copy of Walden. "I thought you might be bored." A smile crossed his features. "Thoughtful of you, though I'd rather hear about what's been happening in town. Mrs. Holloway is wonderful, but she tends to focus on who's courting whom and whose pies won ribbons at the last social." Fiona laughed despite herself, settling into the chair beside his bed. "Well, I'm afraid I don't have much gossip to report. The school is preparing for the harvest pageant. Tommy Miller will be reciting a poem he wrote himself." "That I'd like to see." Elijah shifted, wincing slightly. "When is this grand event?" "Next Friday evening. I'll be there," he declared. Fiona raised an eyebrow. "Doctor Jensen says you shouldn't even think about getting out of bed for at least another week." "Dr. Jensen worries too much." Elijah's expression turned more serious. "I wanted to thank you, by the way, for coming to help at the way station. Anyone would have done the same, but they didn't. You did." His gaze held hers. "Why?" The direct question caught her off guard. "I told you I have nursing experience. That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." His voice was gentle but insistent. "Why did you come, Fiona?" She looked down at her hands, unable to meet his eyes. "I was concerned. When I heard you were hurt, you were worried about me." "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I was worried." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. When she finally looked up, Elijah was watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. "Your letters," she said suddenly, desperate to change the subject. "What happened to the cattle drive? You were supposed to be in Prescott." He allowed the diversion. "Changed plans, got word of better prices in Phoenix, decided to head there instead. Was on my way back when the stagecoach got attacked. My men are probably wondering what happened to me. No one sent word. Telegraph lines down between here and Prescott. Storm last week took out several poles." He shrugged, then grimaced at the movement. "They know I can take care of myself." "Clearly," Fiona said dryly, glancing at his bandaged arm. That earned her a chuckle. "I'll have you know I'm considered quite capable when not being shot by desperate outlaws." Their conversation flowed easily after that, touching on safer topics, books they'd both read, places they'd seen, humorous stories of trail life and schoolroom incidents. It was only when the light began to fade that Fiona realized how long she'd been there. "I should go," she said, rising. "Mrs. Holloway will be wondering where I am." Elijah nodded, though reluctance was clear in his expression. "Will you come back tomorrow?" The request was simple, with no hint of the complexity that churned beneath the surface of their interactions. Fiona knew she should refuse, should begin rebuilding the walls that had protected her these past months. Instead, she heard herself say, "Yes, I'd like that." His smile was worth the momentary weakness. True to her word, Fiona returned the next day and the next. Their conversations deepened with each visit, moving beyond superficial topics to discussions of dreams and disappointments, beliefs and doubts. Elijah spoke of his years building the Diamond M, the loneliness of achievement without someone to share it. Fiona shared stories of her teaching experiences, both in St. Louis and Willow Creek, carefully edited to reveal nothing of her disgrace. By the time the harvest pageant arrived, Elijah was well enough to attend, though Dr. Jensen insisted he use a cane and sit near the door in case he tired. Fiona watched from beside the makeshift stage as he entered the schoolhouse, struck by how right he looked among the townspeople, as if he belonged in Willow Creek far more than she did. The children performed admirably, with Tommy Miller's poem drawing genuine applause. When the program concluded, parents crowded around Fiona, offering congratulations and thanks. She accepted their praise graciously, all the while aware of Elijah watching from his place by the wall. When the crowd finally thinned, he approached, leaning more heavily on the cane than he had earlier. "You should be resting," she chided gently. "Worth the discomfort," he replied. "Those children adore you, you know. It's clear in how they look at you." The observation touched her deeply. "They're wonderful students. I'm lucky to have them. They're lucky to have you." His gaze was warm. "Walk with me? Nights too fine to waste indoors." It was indeed a beautiful evening, crisp autumn air, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. They moved slowly down the main street, Elijah's injury forcing a leisurely pace that allowed for conversation. "When do you plan to return to your ranch?" Fiona asked, dreading the answer but needing to know. "Soon as Dr. Jensen clears me for travel. Another week, maybe two." He glanced at her. "Though I find myself in no hurry to leave." The admission hung between them, fraught with implication. Fiona kept her eyes on the path ahead. "Your men will be wondering where you are. Sent a rider out yesterday with a message. They know I'm safe." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Fiona, there's something I need to ask you," her heart stuttered. "Yes. What are you running from?" The question struck like a physical blow. Fiona took an instinctive step back, eyes wide. "I don't know what you mean." Elijah's expression was gentle but resolute. "I think you do. You're careful, too careful for someone with nothing to hide. You never mention family, friends, details about your life before Willow Creek. Your references can't be checked because they're too far away. Convenient that. You've been investigating me." Hurt and fear made her voice sharp. "No." He reached for her hand, and to her surprise, she didn't pull away. "I've been paying attention. There's a sadness in you, Fiona, a wariness, like you're always waiting for the other boot to drop." She remained silent, heart pounding. "I'm not asking you to tell me everything," he continued softly. "Lord knows we all have parts of ourselves we'd rather keep private, but I need to know if you're in danger, if someone's looking for you." "No one's looking for me," she whispered, the truth of it painful in its own way. "No one cared enough to search. It's not that kind of trouble." Relief crossed his features. "Then whatever it is, it can't be so bad." "You don't know that." Fiona pulled her hand free. "You don't know me, not really." "I'd like to," he said simply, "if you'd let me." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke her resolve. How long had it been since anyone had truly wanted to know her? Not the person she pretended to be, but the flawed, human woman beneath the careful facade. "I can't," she said, the words nearly choking her. "I'm sorry, Elijah, but I just can't." Before he could respond, she turned and hurried away, tears blurring her vision. She didn't stop until she reached the boarding house, where she shut herself in her room and finally allowed the sobs to come. The following morning, Fiona rose early, washed away the evidence of her tears, and prepared for school as if nothing had happened. If the children noticed her unusual quietness, they didn't comment. She threw herself into her teaching with renewed vigor, as if the work could drown out the memory of Elijah's gentle questioning and the pain of her refusal. 3 days passed with no word from him. Fiona told herself it was for the best, that the distance would help her regain her equilibrium. Yet each time the boarding house door opened, her heart leapt with hope that was quickly extinguished. On the 4th day, as she was dismissing her students for the afternoon, a shadow fell across the schoolhouse doorway. Fiona looked up to find Elijah standing there, hat in hand, his expression unreadable. "May I come in?" he asked formally. She nodded, unable to find her voice as the last child scampered past him into the autumn sunlight. Elijah closed the door behind him, then moved to stand before her desk. He looked better than he had at the pageant. Color had returned to his face, and he stood straighter, though he still favored his injured side. "I've been cleared to travel," he announced without preamble, "leaving tomorrow at first light." "I see." Fiona fought to keep her expression neutral. "I wish you a safe journey." He studied her for a long moment. "That's it, safe journey. What would you have me say, Elijah? The truth might be a good start. There was no anger in his voice, only a weary determination. About why you're pushing me away when it's clear there's something between us. Fiona rose from her chair, needing the physical barrier of the desk between them. It wouldn't work. You have your life, I have mine. Lives can change. Mine already has. He took a step closer. Since meeting you. The simple declaration threatened to unravel her carefully constructed defenses. Please don't, she whispered. Don't what? Care about you. Too late for that. His gaze never wavered. I know you feel something too, Fiona. I've seen it in your eyes, felt it in the way you responded when I was hurt. It doesn't matter what I feel, it matters to me. Another step, bringing him to the edge of her desk. Tell me you don't care and I'll walk away. Say the words and I'll leave Willow Creek tomorrow and never look back. Fiona opened her mouth, but the lie wouldn't come. Instead, to her horror, tears filled her eyes. I can't give you what you want, Elijah. How do you know what I want? He asked gently. You want someone whole. Someone without secrets or shame, someone worthy of your diamond and the life you've built. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. That's not me. I think I'm the one who gets to decide what I want. He moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. And who I consider worthy. When he reached for her hand, Fiona didn't resist. His palm was warm against hers, calloused from years of hard work, yet infinitely gentle in its touch. Whatever you're carrying, Fiona, it doesn't change who you are now, the woman who's earned the respect of this town, who's changed children's lives, who rode 15 miles to help strangers. His thumb traced circles on her skin. The woman I've come to care for deeply. You don't understand, she said, voice breaking. If you knew, then tell me. His eyes held hers, steady and unflinching. Whatever it is, we can face it together. The offer was so tempting, so close to what she'd dreamed of but never believed possible. For a moment, Fiona allowed herself to imagine confessing everything, laying her burden at his feet and finding not condemnation but acceptance. Then reality reasserted itself. Men like Elijah Mercer, decent, honorable men, didn't want women with pasts like hers. The truth would destroy whatever was growing between them, and the thought of seeing disgust replace the warmth in his eyes was more than she could bear. I can't, she said finally, pulling her hand away. I'm sorry, but I just can't. Hurt flashed across his features before being replaced by resignation. All right, he said quietly. I won't push, but I want you to know something, Fiona Matthews. He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small, worn book. This belonged to my mother. She carried it with her when she followed my father west, leaving behind everything she knew. He pressed the book into her hands, a small Bible, its leather cover soft with age. She told me once that we all carry burdens, but it's our choice whether to let them define us. His voice was low, intense. Whatever you're carrying, it doesn't have to be your whole story. Before Fiona could respond, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Goodbye, Fiona. If you ever change your mind about sharing that burden, you know where to find me. Then he was gone, the schoolhouse door closing softly behind him. Fiona stood frozen, the little Bible clutched in her hands as the last light of day faded and shadows crept across the empty classroom. Elijah left Willow Creek the following morning. Fiona didn't go to see him off, though she stood at her window watching as the small party rode out of town, heading north toward the Diamond M. Only when the riders had disappeared from view did she allow herself to weep for what might have been, for the truth she couldn't speak, for the burden she would continue to carry alone. Days passed, then weeks. Autumn deepened into winter, bringing cold winds and occasional snow flurries to Willow Creek. Fiona buried herself in her teaching, volunteered for every community event, and wrote long, detailed letters to no one that she burned in her small stove each night. The little Bible Elijah had given her remained on her nightstand, unopened. She couldn't bring herself to read it, yet neither could she bear to put it away. December arrived with a flurry of preparations for Christmas. The schoolchildren were practicing carols and crafting simple gifts for their parents. The town strung evergreen boughs along the main street, and the general store displayed candies and small toys in its window. Fiona moved through it all with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. If the townsfolk noticed her melancholy, they attributed it to a young woman far from home during the holidays. Only Mrs. Holloway seemed to suspect the truth, offering concerned glances over supper and finding small ways to show kindness. It was 2 weeks before Christmas when the letter arrived. Fiona recognized the handwriting immediately, her heart racing as she took the envelope from the postmaster. She waited until she was alone in her room before breaking the seal with trembling fingers. Elijah's letter was brief but direct. "Dear Fiona, I said I wouldn't push, and I mean to keep my word. But as the year draws to a close, I find myself unable to let matters rest as they are. The Diamond M is hosting a Christmas gathering on the 23rd. Nothing grand, just good food, music, and friendly company. I would be honored if you would attend as my guest. A wagon will arrive on the 22nd to bring any townsfolk wishing to make the journey. Whatever your decision, please know that my feelings remain unchanged. If friendship is all you can offer, I will gratefully accept it. With deepest regard, Elijah." Fiona read the letter 3 times before setting it aside. The invitation represented everything she both yearned for and feared: connection, belonging, the possibility of something more than the lonely existence she'd resigned herself to. For days, she wavered. One moment convinced she would decline, the next reaching for paper to accept. Mrs. Holloway, upon learning of the invitation, offered enthusiastic encouragement. "The Diamond M Christmas party is quite the event," the widow informed her over breakfast. "Elijah Mercer does things properly, decorates the whole house, brings in musicians from Prescott. Last year he even had a tree in every room, or so I'm told." "You've never attended?" Fiona asked, surprised. Mrs. Holloway shook her head. "Not much for travel these days, especially in winter, but half the town goes. You should join them." "I'm not sure it would be appropriate," Fiona demurred. The older woman fixed her with a knowing look. "Because of Elijah. The man's a gentleman, dear. He's invited you properly, with witnesses and transportation arranged. Nothing improper about accepting. Put that way, refusal seemed almost churlish." Yet still Fiona hesitated, torn between desire and fear. It was 3 days before the wagon was due to depart that the decision was made for her. Fiona was walking home from school, lost in thought, when she heard a commotion from the direction of the general store. A crowd had gathered, voices raised in excitement. "What's happening?" she asked Tommy Miller's mother, who stood on the outskirts of the group. "Bandits," Mrs. Miller replied grimly. "The same ones that attacked the stagecoach, they think, hit a ranch about 30 miles east. Killed 2 hands and the owner's son." Fiona's blood ran cold. "When?" "Last night. Ryder just brought word." Mrs. Miller shook her head. "Sheriff's forming a posse, says they were headed north, last seen. North, toward the Diamond M." Without conscious thought, Fiona pushed through the crowd to where Sheriff Davies was addressing a group of determined-looking men. "Is the Diamond M in danger?" she interrupted, heedless of propriety. The sheriff turned, surprise registering at her unusual forwardness. "No way to know for certain, Miss Matthews, but we've sent riders to warn all the outlying ranches." "When did they leave?" Her voice was sharper than intended. "About an hour ago. Should reach the Diamond M by nightfall, weather permitting." He studied her with newfound interest. "You acquainted with Mercer?" "Yes," Fiona admitted, ignoring the curious glances from those nearby. "He's a friend," the sheriff nodded, seeming to accept this. "Mercer can handle himself. Got a dozen hands at that place, all armed and capable. He'll be fine." Fiona wasn't reassured. The memory of Elijah pale and bleeding at the way station was too fresh, the thought of him facing those same outlaws again too terrifying to contemplate. She made her decision in that moment. "I'm going with the wagon tomorrow," she announced to Mrs. Holloway that evening. "To the Diamond M." The widow's eyes widened slightly, but she merely nodded. "I'll help you pack in the morning." The journey north was tense, the wagon's occupants subdued by news of the bandit attacks. Fiona sat beside the driver, eyes scanning the horizon as if she might spot trouble before it found them. A light snow had begun to fall, dusting the landscape with white and obscuring distant landmarks. "You're mighty anxious, Miss Matthews," observed the driver, a weathered man named Jenkins who worked for the stage company. "Don't worry, we've got armed escorts." He nodded toward the two riders flanking the wagon. "Have you heard anything more about the bandits?" she asked. Jenkins shook his head. "Nothing since yesterday, but that's good news, means they haven't hit anywhere else." Fiona nodded, trying to take comfort in his words. The logical part of her mind knew Elijah was likely safe, surrounded by capable men in a well-defended ranch house. Yet fear continued to gnaw at her, intensified by the knowledge that their last parting had been left unresolved, if something happened to him before she could explain. The thought was too painful to complete. The Diamond M came into view late that afternoon, a sprawling main house of stone and timber nestled against a backdrop of snow-covered pines, with barns and outbuildings arranged in a protective semicircle. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and lanterns glowed in the gathering dusk. The place radiated solidity and permanence, a testament to its builder's vision and determination. As the wagon approached, figures emerged from the main house, ranch hands coming to help with luggage, a housekeeper in a white apron, and finally, Elijah himself, standing on the broad porch with an expression of stunned disbelief as he spotted Fiona among the arrivals. He moved toward her immediately, long strides eating up the distance, reaching the wagon just as Jenkins helped her down. For a moment they simply stood facing each other, snow gathering on their shoulders, breath visible in the cold air. "You came," Elijah said finally, voice rough with emotion. "I heard about the bandits," Fiona explained, suddenly uncertain now that she was actually here. "I was worried." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "So you traveled 70 miles through dangerous territory because you were concerned for my safety." Put that way, it did sound rather dramatic. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. A slow smile spread across his features. "I'm beginning to think you might care for me after all, Miss Matthews." Before she could formulate a response, he turned to the other arrivals, slipping effortlessly into the role of host. "Welcome to the Diamond M. Please, come inside and warm yourselves. My housekeeper, Mrs. Caldwell, will show you to your rooms." The main house was even more impressive inside high ceilings, polished wood floors, furniture that spoke of comfort rather than ostentation. True to rumor, a Christmas tree stood in every room, decorated with paper stars, pine cones, and small carved wooden ornaments. Evergreen boughs draped the mantels and staircase, filling the air with their fresh scent. Fiona was shown to a pleasant room on the second floor, with a view of the mountains and a small fireplace already lit against the evening chill. She had just finished unpacking her modest belongings when a soft knock sounded at the door. It was Elijah, looking impossibly handsome in a clean white shirt and dark vest, hair still damp from what must have been a hasty washing. "I thought you might like a tour," he offered, before the other guests arrived for supper. "I'd like that," Fiona agreed, unable to resist the opportunity for private conversation. They moved through the house together, Elijah pointing out features with quiet pride: the dining room table he'd built himself, the stone fireplace constructed with rocks from the property, the study with its walls of books collected over years of trips to Denver and San Francisco. "It's beautiful," Fiona said sincerely when they reached the back parlor, a cozy room with windows overlooking snow-covered meadows. "You've created something remarkable here." "It's just a house," Elijah replied, watching her face. "A home requires something more." The implication hung between them, unmistakable yet unspoken. Fiona moved to the window, needing distance from the intensity of his gaze. "I was worried when I heard about the bandits," she admitted, returning to safer ground, "after what happened at the stagecoach." "We're well prepared here," he assured her. Extra men on watch, horses saddled and ready if needed, but I doubt they'll come this way, too many ranches on alert now. Still, be careful." She turned back to him, allowing her concern to show. I couldn't bear it if she stopped, realizing she'd revealed more than intended. Elijah moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the slight scar at his temple, the way his expression softened when he looked at her. "Why did you really come, Fiona?" He asked gently. "The truth." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Because I realized something when I heard you might be in danger, that if something happened to you, I'd never forgive myself for not telling you the truth, for letting fear keep me from." She hesitated. From what? He was so close now she could feel the warmth of him. "From admitting how I feel about you," she whispered. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "And how is that? I care for you, Elijah, more than I should. More than I've allowed myself to care for anyone in a very long time." The admission felt like jumping from a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "Then we have that in common," he said, voice low and intense. "Because I've been half in love with you since that first Sunday in church, when you looked at me as if you could see right through all my defenses." His confession stole her breath. "Elijah, there are things you don't know about me, things that might change how you feel. Tell me," he urged. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The moment of truth had arrived. Fiona stepped back, needing space to gather her thoughts. "Perhaps we should sit down." They settled on the parlor's small sofa, close but not touching. Fiona folded her hands in her lap to stop their trembling. "I wasn't entirely truthful about why I left St. Louis," she began, eyes fixed on the flickering fire. "There was a school and I did teach there, but it didn't close for lack of funds." She swallowed hard. "I was dismissed, publicly and shamefully." Elijah remained silent, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "I was engaged to the headmaster's son, Charles. He was charming, well-educated, from a good family. The memories still had the power to hurt, though the pain had dulled with time. I thought he loved me. I believed we would be married in the spring." She paused, steeling herself for the worst part. "There was a student at the school, a young woman named Rebecca. She was beautiful, wealthy, everything I wasn't. Charles began to pursue her while still engaged to me." "The bastard," Elijah muttered, anger flashing in his eyes. Fiona shook her head. "That wasn't the worst of it. When I confronted him, he claimed I'd misunderstood our arrangement, that we weren't truly engaged, merely understanding each other. He denied everything, made me sound hysterical and delusional. And people believed him," Elijah guessed. Of course they did. His father owned the school, his family was prominent in St. Louis society. Bitterness crept into her voice despite her efforts to control it. "But then Rebecca fell with child, his child." Elijah's hand found hers, offering silent support. "The scandal nearly destroyed the school. Charles denied responsibility, claimed Rebecca had been promiscuous, but I knew the truth. I'd seen them together." Fiona took a deep breath. "I spoke up. Publicly. Told everything I knew about Charles's character, his lies, his manipulation." "Good for you," Elijah said fiercely. "It didn't matter. His father turned it all around, claimed I was jealous and vindictive. I was dismissed, my reputation in tatters. Rebecca was sent away to have the baby in secret." Fiona finally looked up, meeting his eyes. "I left St. Louis because no respectable school would hire me after that. I came west because it was as far as my savings would take me." "And that's it?" Elijah asked after a moment. "That's the terrible secret you've been carrying," confusion crossed Fiona's features. "Isn't it enough? I was publicly humiliated, called a liar and worse. In St. Louis, I'm considered a disgrace." To her astonishment, Elijah laughed, a warm, relieved sound that filled the quiet room. "Fiona Matthews, if that's the worst sin you've committed, you're a damn sight more virtuous than most of the people I know. But my reputation means nothing out here." He squeezed her hand. "Do you think anyone at the Diamond M cares what some stuffed shirt headmaster in St. Louis thinks?" "Do you think I do?" Tears filled her eyes at his easy acceptance. It's not that simple, Elijah. People talk. Word spreads. If someone from back east came through Willow Creek and recognized me, then we'd weather that storm together, he interrupted gently. Fiona, you stood up for the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. You defended a girl who had no one else to speak for her. Those aren't actions to be ashamed of. But the shame followed me anyway, she whispered. I'm carrying it still. Elijah's expression softened. He shifted closer, taking both her hands in his. Then let me carry you instead. The simple words, so heartfelt, so freely offered, broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as years of pent-up emotion finally found release. Elijah drew her into his arms, holding her as she wept, his strength a shelter she hadn't known she was seeking. When the storm of tears finally passed, Fiona remained in his embrace, face pressed against his shirt, drawing comfort from his steady heartbeat. I've been so afraid, she admitted. Afraid to trust again, afraid to believe I could have a normal life after everything that happened. Fear's a poor companion for the journey, Elijah said, his breath warm against her hair. Believe me, I know, lost my wife and baby to childbed fever 12 years ago. Thought I'd never risk my heart again. Fiona pulled back slightly, surprised by this revelation. You were married, he nodded, a shadow of old grief crossing his features. Just for a year. Sarah was 19, I was 23. We were so young, so full of dreams. His smile was bittersweet. After they died, I threw myself into building this ranch, figured if I couldn't have the family I wanted, I'd create something else that would last. I'm so sorry, Elijah. Fiona touched his face gently. I had no idea. Not something I talk about much, he admitted. But I want you to understand I know what it is to carry a burden, to wonder if happiness is something meant for other people. And now, she asked softly, his eyes met hers, unflinching in their honesty. Now I know better. Meeting you taught me that, loving you. The word hung between them, profound in its simplicity. Fiona's heart raced, hope blooming in her chest for the first time in years. I don't expect anything from you, Elijah continued. If friendship is all you're ready for, that's what I'll offer, but I want you to know where I stand. Fiona took a deep breath, gathering her courage once more. What if I want more than friendship? His expression lightened, hope replacing caution. Then I'd say Christmas came early this year. She laughed softly, joy bubbling up inside her. I think I've been falling in love with you since you gave me that copy of Walden, maybe even before that. Say it again, he requested, eyes intent on her face. I love you, Elijah Mercer, Fiona whispered, the words feeling right, natural, as if she'd been meant to speak them all along. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheeks. And I love you, Fiona Matthews, with everything I am. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, a meeting of lips that spoke of reverence and restraint. Then Fiona's arms slid around his neck, drawing him closer, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and alive with promise. They broke apart at the sound of footsteps in the hallway, a reminder that they weren't alone in the house. Elijah rested his forehead against hers, breathing uneven. I should probably warn you, he said with a rueful smile, that I intend to court you properly, with the entire town of Willow Creek as witnesses. Fiona's heart filled with an unfamiliar lightness. I think I'd like that very much. The Christmas gathering at the Diamond M became the talk of the county, not for the beautiful decorations or the excellent food, but for the moment when Elijah Mercer stood before his assembled guests and formally asked permission to court the schoolteacher from Willow Creek. Fiona's acceptance, offered with shining eyes and steady voice, drew applause and congratulations from all sides. They were married the following spring, on a perfect April day when the wildflowers carpeted the meadows surrounding the ranch. The ceremony was held outdoors, with the mountains as their witness and what seemed like half the territory in attendance. Fiona wore a gown of ivory satin with pearls at her throat, a gift from her husband-to-be, and carried a bouquet of local blossoms gathered that morning. When she spoke her vows, there was no hesitation in her voice, no shadow in her eyes. The shame that had followed her west was gone, replaced by the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with the man who had promised to carry her burdens as his own. Life at the Diamond M settled into a pattern of work and joy. Fiona continued to teach, riding into Willow Creek 3 days a week to instruct the children she'd grown to love. The other days, she helped manage the ranch house, planted a vegetable garden that became the envy of neighboring properties, and gradually transformed the bachelor quarters into a true home filled with books, music, and laughter. Elijah watched his wife blossom with a contentment that ran bone deep. Gone was the wary, guarded woman he'd first met in Willow Creek. In her place was a confident, vibrant partner who challenged him, supported him, and loved him with a fierceness that still took his breath away. A year after their wedding, as summer faded into autumn, Fiona shared news that completed their happiness. A child would join their family come spring. Elijah's response was to lift her off her feet in a jubilant embrace, then set her down so gently it made her laugh. "I'm not made of glass, you know," she teased. "Just being careful with my treasures," he replied, hand resting reverently on her still flat stomach. Their son was born on a stormy May morning in 1878, a sturdy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. They named him Thomas, after Elijah's brother who had fallen at Gettysburg. When Fiona placed the infant in her husband's arms for the first time, she watched as years of unspoken grief melted from his face, replaced by a look of wonder that mirrored her own feelings exactly. "He's perfect," Elijah whispered, voice rough with emotion. Just like his mother, Fiona shook her head, smiling despite her exhaustion. "Not perfect, just right for us." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler to little boy, the Diamond M flourished under his parents' combined stewardship. Elijah expanded the operation, breeding horses as well as cattle, while Fiona established a small school on the ranch for the children of their workers and neighboring homesteads. Word of their success spread, bringing occasional visitors from the east. Once, a businessman from St. Louis stopped in Willow Creek, and for a heart-stopping moment, Fiona thought he might recognize her. But the man merely tipped his hat politely and continued on his way, and she realized that even if he had known her before, he would scarcely recognize the confident, happy woman she had become. The summer Thomas turned 4, Fiona gave birth to twin daughters, Emily and Sarah. Elijah wept openly when she suggested naming one after his first wife, a gesture of acknowledgement that the past, with all its joys and sorrows, was part of the tapestry they were weaving together. Life wasn't always easy. The territory could be harsh, with droughts and blizzards threatening their livelihood. There were disagreements, moments of frustration, nights when exhaustion made patience thin. But beneath it all ran the steady current of their love, a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. On their 10th anniversary, Elijah surprised Fiona with a journey not east to the civilization she'd left behind, but west to the Pacific Ocean she'd never seen. They stood together on a California beach, children playing at their feet, and watched the sun sink into endless water. "Regrets?" Elijah asked, arm around her waist. Fiona looked up at the man who had taught her to believe in second chances, who had offered to carry her burdens and given her wings instead. "Not a single one," she answered truthfully. He smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deeper now but still crinkling in that way she loved. "Me neither. Not one single day." They remained there until twilight faded to darkness, listening to the rhythm of the waves and the laughter of their children, two people who had found in each other not just love, but the courage to begin again. Years later, when their hair had silvered and their grandchildren played in the meadows where Thomas had once taken his first steps, Elijah and Fiona would still sometimes sit on the porch of the Diamond M as twilight gathered, hands entwined, and marvel at the journey that had brought them together. "Do you remember what you said to me that day in the parlor?" Fiona would ask, though she had never forgotten the words. "When I told you about the shame I was carrying," and Elijah, voice still strong despite the passing years, would always answer the same way. I said I'd carry you instead. Best offer I ever made. Best offer I ever accepted, she would reply, leaning her head against his shoulder as the first stars appeared above the mountains that had witnessed their love story from the very beginning.